We had a really great chat yesterday with his unofficial title is the Minister for Living Standards. That's because he's the Assistant Minister for Productivity, which doesn't sound nearly as easy to understand. But Andrew Lee's job in the Albanese government is really to get things moving, and it's not simple. The examples I gave you yesterday, that the 3-story apartment block in the 60s, it was a 12-page application for its development. Now it can be 1,000 pages for its development. How do we keep the good regulation and move more quickly through the bad regulation? It's a really difficult question. If you want more renewable energy, you want to decarbonise the economy, you want to have more research and development and scientific labs opening up in the country, how do you do that more efficiently? How do you not avoid the red tape, but how do you move through it more easily? Andrew Lee mentioned one of the groups here in Melbourne. Of course, housing's the most acute problem we've got in this sphere. Here's what Andrew Lee mentioned to me yesterday.
There's been too many opportunities for third-party objections, not enough opportunities for getting things built. That's why I referred to YIMBY Melbourne and the YIMBY movements across Australia, which are looking to try and put more of a focus on development.
So let's have a chat to the YIMBY people. You've heard on 7-7 before Jonathan O'Brien, who's the lead organiser of YIMBY Melbourne. Good morning, Jonathan.
Good morning, Ralph. Great to be back.
Do you think the federal government can make a difference?
Yes, absolutely. Look, the reality is that the federal government sets the standards for the rest of the country, right? They collect most of the tax dollars. They set standards. They can use the productivity, the National Productivity Fund and competition policy to basically get states moving, right? To kind of say, look, this is the standard of development, of change, and of growth that we want to see in an abundant Australia in order to, further prosperity, but also give people more of what they want, more housing, more energy. This is the time to build the future.
People hear you talking and they think, hold on, Jonathan and his group are saying yes, but that means I don't get to say no. People, they deserve a right to say no in some circumstances, don't they, when it comes to development? How do we manage that?
Yeah, so what we have kind of done over the last 70 years is we've built a system that is designed to say no, right? A great example is our Planning and Environment Act in Victoria. Legally recognizes objections to development. It does not recognize statements of support. So when we get our members to go out to councils and say, hey, I would like to support this application, they actually have to click the object button and then in the first sentence say, by the way, I'm supporting this. And that's because we have built a system that says no. So when you say, people need a right to say no, I say they need a right to say yes. And we have systematically locked those voices out for 70 years.
What makes you confident that will work?
Because the demand for housing is there. The demand for energy is there. People will benefit if more of this is worked. But the reality is that localizing decisions that affect the entire state and indeed the entire country just doesn't work. We need to return the rights and the powers to the right level of government, right? If one council doesn't build homes, that affects house prices across the city and across the state and across the country. So the idea that we can just localize these decisions doesn't actually make a huge amount of sense when you think about all of the people who are affected when things don't get built. We think a lot about who's affected when things do get built, but we don't think about who's affected by the opportunity cost of not building.
Yeah, the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD, they're in Paris, and they are saying we aren't building enough houses because of the regulatory system that we've got. Talking about this because the federal government minister, Andrew Lee, was in Melbourne giving a speech about the abundance dilemma, I guess you'd call it. We've got more resources than ever, but we struggle to do things like build extra power lines and build the extra homes that we need. And Andrew Lee mentioned YIMBY, which is why we're speaking to Jonathan O'Brien from YIMBY. Jonathan, can I return to where I began?
Yeah.
Federal governments, they tax income tax, corporate tax, they might set environmental standards around buildings. But when it comes to a local council having a look at a template for all of the 3-story developments near a train station, the federal government, they can't do anything about that, can they? That is something that is solely the preserve of the local council and the state government, surely?
No, not at all. In the 90s, we had AMCORD. I can't remember off the top of my head what that stood for, but it was basically a federal standard for how you build housing and how we build suburbs. Now, if you look at that document, it's wildly outdated and sort of just says sprawl further. But the reality is that the federal government has had and can again have a voice on this. They have a voice on this around commercial zoning, commercial land use, and freeing up productivity and competition in that sector. There's no reason at all that they can't expand that into the realm of housing, and they absolutely should.
We will see what happens. Thanks for joining us again, Jonathan.
Thank you so much for having me.